There is a kind of death that happens before the body stops breathing. It moves quietly, without the drama of a blade or the ceremony of a funeral pyre. It takes a man piece by piece. First his certainty, then his courage, then finally the thing he believed most deeply about himself. The warrior who survives this kind of dying is rarer than any swordsman, and the path back from it is not walked with the feet. Somewhere in the mountains of Iga province, in the 53rd year of the Edo period, a man named Kurou discovered this truth at the edge of a frozen river, alone, with nothing but the sound of water moving beneath ice, and a question he could not answer. If you've ever felt that quiet kind of dying, walk with us through this story. The ancient world has something to say to you. Subscribe to Ancient Wisdom Tea and let the old fires warm what the modern world has left cold. Kurou had not always been a man who questioned. That, perhaps, was the source of everything that followed. He had been born into a family of minor retainers, the third son of a man who polished armor for a living and who smelled perpetually of oil and iron. From the time Kurou could walk steadily, he had watched the samurai who came to collect their lacquered breastplates and domaru with a hunger that felt almost sacred. He studied the way they moved through the world, as though the ground itself was honored to be pressed beneath their sandals. By the time he was 9 years old, he had decided that he would become one of them, not merely in title, but in the truest sense. He would become the kind of man who did not flinch. He found his teacher at 13. Sensei Daishin was not a celebrated man. He had fought in no famous battles. His name appeared in no records of valor. He ran a small dojo behind a persimmon grove on the northern edge of town, and his students numbered fewer than a dozen. What he possessed instead of fame was something rarer and harder to name, a quality of being that made the air around him feel heavier and more real, as though existence itself became more concentrated in his presence. When Daishin walked into the dojo each morning, the students did not merely notice him, they became more awake. Kurou trained with a ferocity that alarmed the other students. He arrived before dawn. He remained after sunset. He wrapped his blistered hands himself and returned to the forms before the wrapping dried. Within 2 years, his technique had surpassed students who had begun training before he was born. Sensei Daishin watched all of this with an expression that Kurou could never fully read. Something between approval and concern. The way a man watches a river that runs beautifully fast and wonders when it will meet the cliff. The sensei never praised him. This fact tortured Kurou in ways he could not have articulated. After every sparring session, after every perfect execution of a form that left the other students breathless, Daishin would nod, a single economical movement of the head, and say nothing more. Kurou began to practice harder, as though excellence were a door that simply needed a greater force of knocking. He trained in rain. He trained with fever. He trained until the forms moved through him in his sleep, and his hands would sometimes grip the edge of his sleeping mat in the dark, unconsciously finding the angle of a defensive posture. He was 18 when the test came, not the formal test of the dojo, but the real one, the one the world administers without warning. A traveling swordsman had come through the province, a man named Gozen who styled himself a duelist, and who moved from town to town, issuing challenges to local schools. He was skilled in a way that was immediately visible, the kind of skill that carries its own gravity and draws spectators the way a fire draws moths. He had defeated the students of 4 other dojos in the province, and he carried that record openly, like an ornament. When he arrived at Daishin's persimmon grove and issued his challenge, the students gathered and looked at one another with the language of eyes. Sensei Daishin accepted on behalf of his school, then did something unexpected. He nominated Kurou. Not himself. Not the most senior student. Kurou. 18 years old. 6 years of training. The fastest hands in the dojo. That night, Kurou did not sleep. He lay on his mat and stared at the ceiling beams, and felt something he had never felt before in the context of a fight. Something cold and spreading, like ink dropped into still water. He examined his technique mentally, running through every form, every counter, every angle of attack and defense. He found no flaw he could name. His body was ready. So why did his chest feel like a stone had been placed on it? Dawn came purple and cold. The dojo cleared its furniture to create space. The students arranged themselves along the walls. Gozen arrived without ceremony, bowed once with the precision of someone who finds ritual mildly tedious, and took his position. Kurou stood across from him and felt the ink spread further. He was not afraid of pain. He had been struck 10,000 times in training and had learned to receive impact without drama. He was not afraid of losing, he told himself. And then, in the honesty that exists only in the space between heartbeats, he understood that this last thing was a lie. He was profoundly, architecturally afraid of losing. Everything he had constructed of himself in 6 years of pre-dawn rising and blood-wrapped hands and silent hunger, all of it rested on being the kind of man who did not lose, who could not be defeated, who had made himself into something invulnerable through sheer, grinding will. When Gozen moved, Kurou was already somewhere else. Not in the room, not in the moment. He was in the outcome, in the imagined futures branching ahead of him, catastrophic and bright by turns, and none of them here, none of them now, none of them the actual sword, moving through actual air in the actual present second. He lost in 12 exchanges. Gozen's wooden practice sword touched his shoulder, his wrist, his throat in quick succession. The final touch, a controlled stop at the hollow of his neck, lasted only a breath before Gozen stepped back and bowed. The room was silent, the specific silence that carries weight. Sensei Daishin's face revealed nothing. He thanked Gozen. He dismissed the students. He asked Kurou to remain. For a long time, the two of them sat in the empty dojo and said nothing. The morning light moved through the high window and crossed the floor like a slow hand. Kurou stared at the grain of the wood between his knees and felt the particular devastation of a man whose identity has been separated from its foundations. When Daishin finally spoke, his voice was not unkind, but it was exact. "Tell me," he said, "where you were during the match." Kurou looked up. "I was here, Sensei. No." Daishin said this simply, without emphasis, the way one corrects a mathematical error. "You were not here. You were in 10 different futures. I watched your eyes. You were calculating outcomes instead of reading the present moment. You fought the match you feared instead of the match that was actually happening." Kurou opened his mouth and closed it. There was no useful argument. "Your technique is extraordinary," Daishin continued. "Your body knows what to do. But your mind is ungovernable. It runs ahead of the moment like a dog chasing something it will never catch. And while it runs, the moment passes. And with it, your chance." He stood, moving to the window, looking out at the persimmon trees. "I have watched you train for 6 years. You are the most technically gifted student I have taught in 30 years of teaching. And you are also the most lost. You practice the sword as though perfecting it will make you safe. as though if your technique becomes flawless enough, the world will be required to confirm the story you tell about yourself. He turned. But the world is not required to confirm anything, and the man who fights to protect his story always loses to the man who has no story to protect. These words entered Kurou slowly, the way cold enters a body that has been standing in winter wind, first unnoticed, then everywhere at once. "What do I do?" he said. Daishin looked at him for a moment. With that expression, Kurou had never been able to read. Now, at last, he understood it. It was the expression of a man watching something he loves approach a transformation it cannot yet imagine. "Go to the river," Daishin said. "Not to practice, not to drill forms. Go and sit beside it and do nothing. Watch it. Return when you understand what it is teaching you." The river that ran along the eastern edge of the province was called the Shiragawa, the White River, because of the way it moved over pale stones. In winter, its edges froze while the center ran on, and the sound it made was the sound of something that had no interest in being anything other than exactly what it was. Kurou arrived at the Shiragawa on a morning in late autumn, when the maples had turned the color of old embers and the air tasted of iron and coming cold. He sat on a flat rock at the river's edge and felt immediately ridiculous. He was a swordsman. He had forms to practice. There was a defeat to recover from, a reputation to rebuild, a story to reassemble. He lasted perhaps an hour before his hands began to move through practice gestures unconsciously. He caught himself and stopped. Sat. Watched the water. The water did not care that he watched it. This was, he would later understand, the entire point. But understanding came slowly, the way rivers carve stone, not through the violence of a single great force, but through the patient insistence of presence over time. He returned the next day, and the day after. The early visits were exercises in discomfort. His mind generated a constant interior noise, rehearsals of the defeat, revisions of what he should have done, imagined future matches in which he triumphed decisively and erased what had happened. Beneath all of this ran a persistent, formless anxiety, the feeling of a man who has built his house on ground that has begun to shift. But the river ran regardless, cold and white over pale stones, indifferent to his noise, present in a way that Kurou, for all his discipline, had never been. On the 6th morning, something happened that he could not fully explain afterward. He had been sitting for perhaps 2 hours, watching the place where the frozen edge met the moving current, when his mind quieted. Not because he forced it. He had tried forcing it and produced only more noise. It quieted the way a struck bell eventually quiets, not by being stopped, but by being allowed to run its full course. And in that quiet, Kurou became aware of something he had never noticed, despite having lived inside it his entire life. The simple, irreducible fact of the present moment. The cold of the rock beneath him, the sound of the river, the sensation of breath entering and leaving, the specific grey-white quality of the morning light on moving water. None of this was remarkable. All of it was completely, startlingly real in a way that his mental projections and rehearsals and imagined futures were not. He sat for another hour without moving, without thinking, in the usual restless way, simply present with what was. When he finally stood, his legs had gone numb from cold, and he felt strangely, not happy exactly, but clarified, as though something had been wiped from a surface he had not known was obscured. He returned to Sensei Daishin that evening. "I think I understood something," he said. He described the quieting, the clarity. Daishin listened. Then he said, "You understood a word, not the language. Go back." Kurou went back for 40 days. He went in rain that turned the river brown and swollen. He went in the first thin snow of winter, when the air tasted of metal and the world went quiet in the way it only does when snow is falling. He went on mornings when the cold was so deep it felt like a presence itself, not hostile, just absolute. He sat with his discomfort without negotiating with it. He sat with his fear without dressing it in philosophy. He sat with the memory of the defeat, not rehearsing it, not analyzing it, but simply allowing it to be what it was. Something that had happened, fully real, fully finished, existing now only as a memory in a mind that was learning, slowly and with great difficulty, to live in the present moment. On the 23rd day, he noticed that his mind's constant revisiting of the match had become less frequent. Not absent, it would return with the reliability of a tide, but less consuming. He could observe the thought the way he observed the river. See it, recognize it, let it move through without being carried by it. On the 31st day, practicing alone by the river's edge with a fallen branch, he experienced something that stopped him mid-movement. He had been moving through a form, not drilling it deliberately, but simply moving, allowing his body to do what 6 years of training had made instinctive, and something shifted. The form moved through him rather than from him. His mind was not directing, it was observing. His body moved with a fluidity that felt less like execution and more like water finding its natural course. Inevitable, effortless, exactly right. He stood still afterward for a long time with the branch at his side and felt something he recognized distantly as the absence of fear, not the performed fearlessness of a young man trying to prove himself. The real thing, the thing that exists not because danger is absent, but because the self, doing the fearing, has temporarily stepped aside. When he returned to Daishin, the sensei looked at him for a moment, and then nodded. Not the economical single nod Kurou had spent 6 years trying to earn. Something slower, something that recognized a change. "Now we train," Daishin said. The training that followed was unlike anything in the previous 6 years. Daishin did not increase the difficulty of the forms, he made them simpler. He had Kurou practice a single cut, one diagonal downward strike, hundreds of times per session. Not to perfect the angle of the blade or the distribution of weight through the hips, though these things mattered, but to practice being fully inside the cut. Not thinking about the cut, not monitoring the cut. Inside it, the way the river is inside its own current. "The sword moves through time," Daishin said one morning, watching Kurou practice. 100 cuts, but the samurai does not move through time. The samurai moves through this cut, only this cut. The next cut does not exist yet. The previous cut is finished. There is only now the blade, now the weight, now the breath. He had Kurou do other things too. He sent him to assist the cook, not to learn cooking, to learn presence in cooking. The cook, an old man named Jiru, who had worked at the dojo since before Kurou's birth, moved through his kitchen with the same quality of attention Daishin brought to the dojo floor. He tasted with his full attention. He listened to the sound of a simmer with the focus of a man listening for an important message. He was not a man doing tasks. He was a man being fully inside whatever was in front of him. Kurou watched him and felt something that was almost humbling. The recognition that a man who had never held a sword possessed something that Kurou's 6 years of intense training had failed to produce. "He is more samurai than you are," Daishin said, as though reading the thought. "He has always known where he is. You are only now learning." Kurou did not argue. He went to help Kurou with the firewood, and when Kurou showed him how to read the wood before splitting it, how to see the grain, feel the weight, understand the particular nature of this piece before bringing the axe down, Kurou listened with the full attention he had previously reserved only for instruction in swordsmanship. And he discovered something. The practice of presence is the same, regardless of what you are being present with. The river, the firewood, the sword, the kitchen, the opponent, the quality of attention is the same. What changes is only the object, never the nature of the attending. Winter deepened. The river froze solid. Kurou stood on its surface one morning and felt the ice beneath him. Solid, unmoving, the stillness of water that has committed entirely to being still, and understood something about the relationship between depth and surface. The ice was still. The water beneath it still moved. A man could be still on the surface without being frozen all the way through. Stillness was not emptiness. It was depth wearing a quiet face. He brought this thought to Daishin, who considered it for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "the samurai must be like the frozen river. Still enough on the surface that the opponent cannot read what is happening beneath, but moving in the depths, aware, awake, flowing. A man who is still all the way through is a dead man. A man who is moving all the way through can be read like a page. The mastery is to hold both at once." Spring came reluctantly to the province, as it always did in the mountains. First a single day of warmth, then a return of cold, then warmth again. The season negotiating with winter, like a younger brother demanding his turn. Kurou's training had shifted in ways he could feel, but not always name. His forms had become quieter. His sparring sessions, Daishin now had him working with the senior students again, had a different texture. He was not thinking less. He was thinking differently. The strategic mind was still there, reading the opponent, noting the tendencies and openings and rhythms. But it was no longer the only mind operating. Beneath the strategic mind, there was now something that functioned without thinking entirely. A deep, trained awareness that responded to the present moment before thought could form. He lost sparring sessions, still. This no longer destroyed him. He would note what had happened, understand what it was telling him, and file it without drama. The defeat was information. It was not a verdict on the question of who he was. It was in late spring that Daishin told him the school had received a challenge, not from a traveling duelist this time, from another dojo, a school in the southern part of the province, with a reputation for aggression and technical brilliance. Their senior student, a man named Ryuichi, had defeated the representatives of 6 schools in the past year. He was a year older than Kurou, and said to be the finest young swordsman in the province. The challenge was for a formal match at the provincial gathering, observed by all the masters of the region. Daishin did not nominate Kurou this time. He asked. "The match is in 3 weeks," he said. "I believe you are ready. But ready means something different than it meant a year ago. I am not asking if your technique is sufficient. I am asking if you are able to be present in conditions that will make presence very difficult. There will be observers. There will be history between our schools. There will be the memory of your last public match. All of this will try to pull you out of the moment. Are you able to remain inside it?" Kurou considered this honestly, the way a man considers the depth of water before he steps into it. "I don't know," he said. I think so. But I've never been tested at that level. Daishin nodded, with something that might have been satisfaction. That is the most honest answer I've ever received to that question. Most students say yes, the honest ones don't know yet. Go and be with your practice. We'll talk again before the gathering. The 3 weeks before the match were not what Kurou expected. He did not drill with greater intensity. He did not analyze reports of Ryuichi's technique. He continued his practice with the same quality and pace as before. The single cut, the presence in ordinary tasks, the meditations by the river now, running free and cold and full with snowmelt. He was waiting for the anxiety to come and besiege him, the way it had before his match with Gozen. When it came, he simply watched it move through him, without building it a house to live in. On the morning of the gathering, he woke before dawn and sat in the dark of the dojo. The building was empty and silent. Outside, the province was still sleeping. He sat in the specific quality of pre-dawn stillness and simply breathed, fully present with the dark and the quiet, and the sensation of being alive inside a body that would today be tested. He did not think about Ryuichi. He did not rehearse strategies. He was simply here, and then he was simply walking through the dark to the provincial hall, and then he was simply present in the room, filling with observers and the smell of cedar and lamp oil and the particular charged atmosphere of formal competition. And then he was simply standing across from Ryuichi, who was tall and composed, and who moved through his preparatory stretches with the fluid confidence of a man who has not yet known public defeat. They bowed, they assumed their positions. The officiating master signaled the beginning. Ryuichi attacked with immediate ferocity, a combination that was clearly designed to establish dominance early, to plant a specific story in the observers' minds before the match had truly begun. It was brilliant, tactically. It was also legible. Kurou read it the way Giroux read wood before splitting, not with his thinking mind, but with the deeper awareness that had been building all winter by the river. He moved through the attack without forcing a counter, letting Ryuichi's aggression pass him like water passes stone, redirecting rather than resisting. Ryuichi reset, adjusted. His eyes were focused and calculating. He was thinking. Kurou noted this with the calm interest of a man watching clouds move across water. The match continued for 8 minutes, an unusual length, the observers would remark later. Most formal matches resolved quickly, decisively, one way or another. This one was different because Kurou refused to be drawn into Ryuichi's rhythm. Every time Ryuichi generated an exchange that seemed to be moving toward conclusion, Kurou would simply not be where the conclusion required him to be. Not through superior speed. Ryuichi was perhaps slightly faster in pure physical terms. Through presence, through the difference between a man who reads the present moment and a man who enacts a plan he formed before the moment arrived. In the 6th minute, Kurou saw something change in Ryuichi's eyes. The calculation flickered. For just a breath, perhaps less than a breath, the younger man's attention moved from the present moment to the observers along the walls, to the story of the match, to the question of how this was going and where it was going, to the 10 futures branching ahead of him. In that breath, Kurou was already moving. His wooden sword touched Ryuichi's left shoulder with a control that was deliberate. He did not slam it down or drive through with force. He simply placed it there, firmly and precisely, in the way that a true swordsman is required to do, demonstrating that he could have ended it completely. The officiating master called the point. After the second exchange concluded and the match was decided, Ryuichi stood for a long moment looking at Kurou, with an expression that Kurou recognized. He had worn it himself. standing in the dojo with the memory of Gozen's sword at his throat, the expression of a man whose interior architecture has been disturbed. He bowed deeply. Kurou returned it with equal depth. On the walk back to the dojo, Daishin walked beside him in silence for a long time. The evening had come cool and blue, and the province smelled of pine and wood smoke. "Tell me what happened," Daishin said. "I don't know exactly," Kurou said. "In the 6th minute he left, and I was still there." Daishin was quiet for another long moment. "Yes," he said, "that is the entire practice, to still be there. Every student leaves at some point, into fear, into the future, into the story of themselves. The master is the one who learns to return, again and again. Not because he never leaves, but because the distance between leaving and returning grows shorter with each year, until finally, perhaps, it becomes so short that it cannot be measured." "Does it ever disappear entirely?" Kurou asked. Daishin considered this with the honesty he brought to all things. "I have been practicing for 50 years, he said. "There are moments, long moments sometimes, but I would not say it disappears. I would say it becomes less interesting. The moment you are in is more interesting than the moment you imagine might come next. Once you truly feel that, not as an idea, but as a living fact, the mind has less reason to leave." Years passed in the way years do when a man is genuinely occupied. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the sense of fullness that comes from being present in each one. Kurou became a teacher at Daishin's dojo. When the sensei finally retired to a small house at the edge of the persimmon grove and spent his days in the garden and in the contemplation that is the particular luxury of old age, Kurou assumed the teaching of the students. He was not a celebrated man, in the way of the famous swordsmen whose names moved through the province in stories. He had fought 3 more formal matches in his life and had won 2. The third, in his 34th year, he had lost to a wandering master who was simply better, a man of 60, whose presence was so complete it felt like standing beside the river. You could feel it without being able to explain it. After that match, Kurou had bowed and asked if the man would stay and teach for a week. The master had laughed, a real laugh, surprised and pleased, and stayed for 3. What Kurou possessed was not legend, but the thing legends are made of, badly translated. He possessed a quality of attention that the students felt immediately upon entering his dojo. Not intimidating, exactly. More like being near a lamp. You became more visible to yourself in his presence, the way a lamp makes visible what was always in the room, but unlit. His students came from the usual places, the sons of farmers and minor retainers, young men shaped by the same hunger he had known at 13. They arrived with varying degrees of technical aptitude and the same universal flaw. They were all, every one of them, mostly somewhere else. Planning futures, healing pasts, protecting stories, fighting imagined battles with imagined opponents in the constant interior war that most men live inside without knowing it has a name. He taught them the way Daishin had taught him, not with speeches, but with practice, not with philosophy, but with the accumulated weight of ordinary moments attended to completely. He sent them to sit beside rivers. He had them chop wood and carry water and sweep floors. And when their minds wandered from the broom to the sword to the story of themselves, he would stop them gently and say, "Where are you?" And then, "Be here." One student arrived in the 7th year of Kurou's teaching, a boy of 16 named Haruki, who was technically exceptional from the first day, and who was also, beneath his considerable talent, running a continuous and exhausting interior dialogue about whether he was sufficient. Kurou recognized him with the particular clarity of self-recognition. He watched this boy for 3 weeks before saying anything beyond ordinary instruction. Then one evening he asked Haruki to walk with him to the river. The Shiragawa had been his teacher's teacher, in a way. He brought his students there when words had reached their natural limit. They stood on the bank in the evening light and listened to the water. "What do you hear?" Kurou asked. Haruki listened. "The river." "What else?" A long pause. "The wind in the reeds, a bird somewhere." "What else?" Another pause. Longer. The boy's face shifted slightly. "My own breathing." "What else?" This time the silence stretched for what might have been a full minute. And then something changed in Haruki's posture. A subtle releasing, like a fist slowly opening. "Just this," he said finally. "Just what's here." Kurou said nothing. They stood by the river until the light left the water and the first stars appeared over the mountains. Walking back, Haruki said, "I spend a lot of time worrying about whether I'm good enough." "I know," Kurou said. "Does it stop?" Kurou considered the honest answer, the way Daishin had always given him honesty instead of comfort. "It changes. The worry becomes less interesting than the moment you're in. But that takes time. That takes showing up, completely, to more moments than you can count." He paused. "And then one day, you're standing by a river, and you realize the river isn't waiting to be a better river. It isn't comparing itself to other rivers. It is not rehearsing being a river. It is simply, entirely, absolutely, a river. And something in you understands that this is also available to you, not as a destination, as a practice." Haruki walked beside him in silence for a while. Then, "How do you practice it?" "The same way you practice a sword form," Kurou said. "Badly at first, then less badly. Then, in moments, something that feels like the real thing. And you return to those moments the way you return to a form, not to collect them, not to possess them, but to be reminded of what you are practicing toward." In the 39th year of his life, Kurou walked back to the persimmon grove to visit Daishin. The old man sat in the garden, in the shade of the largest tree, with a bowl of tea in both hands and an expression of complete ease. The ease of a man who has finished a very long argument with himself and found the silence afterward peaceful. They sat together for an hour, mostly without speaking. The garden was full of the small sounds that gardens make. Insects in the grass, a bird in the tree, the movement of wind through leaves. Finally, Daishin said, "You're a good teacher." Coming from Daishin, this was an entire sermon. "I had a good teacher," Kurou said. The old man smiled. "You had a pointing finger. You found what it was pointing at yourself." He drank his tea. "That is the only way it ever works." Kurou thought about this, sitting in the garden of the man who had sent him to the river and changed everything with the simplest possible instruction. He thought about the match with Gozen, and the 40 days by the Shiragawa, and the morning on the ice understanding stillness that was not frozen all the way through. He thought about Haruki, who was now 17, and whose presence in the dojo had a quality that was just beginning, just barely beginning, to feel like the river. "Is there more?" he asked. Not anxiously, genuinely, with the curiosity of a student who has learned enough to know how much remains. Daishin looked at him with the expression that Kurou had finally learned to read. Not approval and concern, but something that had no easy name. the expression of a man who sees another man becoming what he was always meant to be. "There is always more," he said. "This is not a criticism. It is the best news there is. The practice doesn't end. The river doesn't reach a point where it decides it has been sufficiently river and stops. It moves. It moves and moves and moves, and where it goes, life follows." He set down his tea bowl. The man who believes he has arrived stops being present. He begins to protect what he has understood instead of remaining open to what he has not understood yet. The samurai's deepest practice is this: to hold everything he knows with an open hand. To remain, always, a beginner. Kurou sat with this in the garden, where the persimmons were coming green on the branches, and the afternoon was golden, and the old master breathed with the ease of still water that has learned to be still all the way through. And he understood, at last, what Daishin had seen in him at 18, not just a technically gifted student. A man who would need to be broken open before he could become spacious enough to hold what the practice was actually offering. Who would need to lose his story before he could find his presence. Who would need to sit by a river in winter, cold and embarrassed and without answers, before the silence could say what the words had not been able to carry. The sword, Kurou thought, was never the point. The sword was the river you sat beside until the river taught you how to be still and moving at the same time. Until it taught you that the only moment you ever truly possess is this one. Not the next, not the previous, but this exact breath in this exact light, with these specific trees, and this specific tea cooling in this specific bowl, and this specific old man sitting beside you with his eyes half closed in the late afternoon. This moment, only ever this moment. Fully, completely, irrevocably here. That is the sword the samurai carries who cannot be defeated. Not the one at his side, but the awareness at his center. Quiet as deep water, present as breath, available to anyone willing to sit beside a river long enough to hear what it has always been saying. This is the ancient teaching that has no expiration. It was true in the mountains of Aiga province, at the frozen edge of the Shiragawa. It is true wherever you are, right now, reading these words. For more from the world that knew these things before the noise began, find us at Ancient Wisdom Tea, and walk a little more slowly today. The moment you are in deserves more of you than you are giving it.